Hello, listeners. It's Susan here, and I have some exciting news I want to share with you all. As many of you know, I've been helping you navigate divorce and life beyond through the Divorce and Beyond podcast. But now, turns out, I have a new adventure on the horizon. I want to introduce you to Turns Out, my brand new podcast, which will be launching in the new year. This show is going to be all about life's unexpected twists and turns, those aha moments that change everything. So this will be from career pivots to personal revelations. We will be exploring the stories that prove life is full of surprises. I can't wait to share more with you, but for now, make sure to visit turnsoutpodcast.com and keep an eye out for our launch drop. You don't want to miss any of the inspiring stories, and you might even hear a few familiar voices. So stay tuned and remember, turns out life has so much more in store than we ever imagined.
Coming up on today's episode of the Divorce and Beyond podcast.
We can't make the decision on the dog's future based on your hurt feelings or your negative emotions, because then you're losing the dog. You're not considering your dog. You're not seeing the situation through their eyes. And that's really hard, but you can do it. And that's when the sort of most correct decision for the dog is there, if you dig for it.
Hello, and welcome to the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host. As a top divorce attorney and family law mediator for 30 years, I know what you need to know to get through your divorce, and most importantly, how to move beyond it to thrive and transition to your new future. My experts and I are here to give you the insider view into the process, so listen in for the wisdom and expert information you need on your journey through divorce and beyond. Hello, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host, and listeners, this week, we are going to talk about a topic that is very, very near and dear to my heart, or in this instance, to my feet, because both of my dogs are laying right near me under the desk, right near my feet. So we are going to be talking about our pets and that intersection with divorce and pet custody and all of the issues that can arise out of our love for our companion animals. And I'm really delighted to be talking about this topic because, as I was just mentioning to my special guest, this is something that continues to come up. And because the landscape around this issue, at least legally, but I also think societally, is changing and shifting a bit, so is the conversation that will happen as you go through your divorce or your separation. So I'm very happy to have with me Karis Nafte. Karis is the founder of WhoKeepsTheDog.com. She is a pet mediator. She does pet custody. And very importantly, her brand new book just came out, and not coincidentally, it is called Who Keeps the Dog? Navigating Pet Custody During Divorce. So thank you so much for coming to talk to me about something that you and I both know is near to my heart, near to your heart. You have, for those who can't see the video version, Karis has a beautiful portrait of her dog behind her. And I'm so happy we're going to dive into this today. Thank you, Karis.
Thank you, Susan. Happy to be here.
You know, one thing that I think I know the answer, but why it seems like a big niche. It seems like a big, we've really narrowed your practice down to this very certain area, and it would seem to me to be obvious why, but let me hear from you. Why is this where you center your practice and your efforts in this world?
My background, which led me to this work, is that I am a dog trainer and a dog behavior consultant. And the easiest way I can describe a dog behavior consultant is that I'm a dog psychologist, could think of it that way. I have many years experience working with families and dogs when there is something is not right with the dog. So something is off with their behavior. Maybe the dog is aggressive, or having anxiety issues. Maybe the dog bit the child. Maybe the dog tried to kill your cat. All of these sort of, really, trust me, if you can think of something a dog has done, I'm sure I've seen it over the years. And Susan, a few years ago, I started to encounter my own clients who needed my help as a behaviorist with very anxious dogs, very unhappy dogs, households where the dog was not fitting for various reasons. And with these particular clients, the reason why the behavior was happening the way it was because of the divorce custody decision. And the decision that had been arrived at, whether it was fought out in a courtroom or whether it was mediated or whether they had just sort of casually trying it, it wasn't working for the dog. And that's what had to be addressed. And after seeing this quietly for years, like, as you say, things are changing culturally. So I've noticed this for maybe the last 15 years, but then I started to see it becoming such an issue that I realized I wanted to focus my work with my background in understanding dog behavior and the way people relate to their dogs in the space of divorce. And for me personally, it's quite a sweet job that I've arrived at because my mom was a divorce mediator. So I grew up, she was one of the first directors of the Oregon Mediation Association back in the 80s. So I grew up in a house where mediation as a concept was always spoken about, and I always had great reverence and excitement for the process of mediation. And so when I came to this in my own adult life, it just sort of seemed like, all the stars aligned that this is really what I'm supposed to do. And it's a very niche job that I do. And sometimes when I tell people what I do, they kind of roll their eyes. They're like, what? But then what happens is they pause for a moment and they go, hang on. Oh yeah, my cousin. Oh, wait a minute, my neighbor. And everybody, literally who I've spoken to, knows somebody who has struggling with this. And it's only becoming more common. And so, yes, that's where I find myself, is working with divorce professionals, consulting with them and offering education to those people who want to know how do we look after pets in divorce, and also with my own clients to help them make decisions about custody and divorce and guardianship where we're really focusing on what's best for the dog. And it's hard to do that when emotions do what they do in divorce.
Oh, yeah. Well, and let's double down on that, the emotional content, right? Emotions are high, shall we say? That's the best word. They're flowing during divorce, and they're not the good emotions for the most part, the pleasant ones. There's not happiness, there's not joy, there's not a lot of that. I will say, hopefully those come later, but we feel a lot of fear. We feel sometimes anger. We feel sadness, a lot of those things. And add to that our pets, I know for me, my dogs are my comfort. They are my emotional little, Klingons. If something is wrong in my day, I can guarantee you I have one 70-pound, Klingon on one leg and one 10-pound Klingon on the other. And that makes me feel better. So when you're going through divorce and you're talking about this issue of where the dogs are going to stay, who keeps the dogs, let's go straight to your titles, right? It's doubly emotional for people. So you're not just dealing with people, trying to make the best decision about the dog, but you're asking them to do it at a time when they are going through a lot of emotion, and you're talking about perhaps taking their emotional safety blanket away from them, right?
Exactly. It's a huge crossroads, multiple crossroads happening that have to be dealt with so mindfully, to use that famous word, but so with so much kindness to everybody. You have to be kind to yourself. You have to be kind to the dog. You have to try to find some kindness for your ex, even though it might not really be there, but some understanding that in that I would also add powerless to those emotions that some people feel. I think when the divorce is happening, there's a sense of kind of losing control. And for a lot of people that I work with, I hear phrases like, well, she had the affair, so I'm taking the dog, almost like it as an emotional seesaw. And that's a really understandable feeling to have. But what I work with people to help them arrive at is like, that's got nothing to do with the dog, though. We can't make the decision on the dog's future based on your hurt feelings or your negative emotions, because then you're losing the dog. You're not considering your dog. You're not seeing the situation through their eyes. And that's really hard, but you can do it. And that's when the sort of most correct decision for the dog is there, if you dig for it.
And I think that that's, sort of setting the table for the conversation. I would guess that you're going to have, say, in a mediation or when you're discussing with a couple the issue of their pet's custody. But I would imagine another thing that can complicate that is the fact that in most states, although this is changing, thankfully, but in most states, dogs are the equivalent of a piece of furniture. And ownership, literally like title to the dog, however that is, becomes, from at least a court's perspective, how you determine who's going to keep the animal. So that probably gets thrown into the mix as well. So you're talking about what's best for the dog, and you probably at least have one person going, yeah, but the law says it's my dog.
Absolutely. And it's a very difficult tightrope to walk. And I point out to my clients, it's like, the dog doesn't care about the law. The dog doesn't care about who paid for it. And yes, if you can't make the decision yourself and you end up in court, then in most states, as you say, although in about, I would say 8 states now, it's different. So people must do their own research about where they live. If you cannot make the decision yourself, you're leaving it to the judge to make that decision. And that's a really heartbreaking situation to be in. And what's interesting, Susan, is even in the states where, like California, for example, the rules are different in California, and judges there are allowed to grant shared custody with dogs. And in the clients that I work with in that area, that is often what judges do, is say, that's fine, you can just share the dog 50-50, without realizing that a lot of dogs, that's a very stressful situation to put a lot of dogs in. I'm working with a person now who's in California, and they have a dog who there's been a long fight with the ex, and the judge finally, it made its way to court. They couldn't agree. And the judge said 1 week each. That's what's happening. That's what the judge decided. And the dog in question is a very old dog who has diabetes, who's had surgery on both its back legs. It can't walk very well. It's a very physically fragile dog. And now, because the people couldn't make a decision themselves, this dog, I would say, is subjugated to moving between houses every week. And for this dog, it's becoming very stressful. So whether you're in a state that will allow shared custody or you're in a state where dogs are still considered property, you want to make this decision yourself. And you can, even if the law says one thing, it doesn't mean that person has to keep the dog. That just means that's what will happen if it ends up going down that train and you end up in court over it.
I think that's such a good point to make, right? That in media, and this, we've talked about this in many other episodes of Divorce and Beyond, when it comes to mediation, and usually we're talking about the fact that you can vary from the parenting plan, or you can vary from the property settlement that a judge would order or might order if the two of you agree on it. It's the same thing if you're mediating your pet custody situation. You can vary from whichever decision a judge or whatever, path your judge might go down. And, I'm going to share my own story with my listeners. They've heard aspects of it, but when I got divorced so many years ago, my ex-husband and I had 2 tiny little teacup Yorkies that were basically the center of our world. They went everywhere with us. They both fit into one little doggy carrier. They had flown all over, they fit together under the seat in front of you. And then we were splitting up. And this was a complicated situation because although at the time, legally, I owned both of the dogs. They had been purchased for me. It was a situation where one dog, the first dog, had been purchased as a gift for me. But that dog took one look at my ex-husband and it was like, it was play the slow music, running across the field. That dog, he loved me, but not like he loved my ex. So we did what any sane people do, and we went and got another dog, and that dog was supposed to take one look at me. No, that dog took one look at the other dog and played the slow music. That dog fell in love with the other dog. I don't know where I was in the mix. I'm a very nice dog owner, everyone. If you're out there wondering, most of my dogs just absolutely adore me, but these two, and so they were a very bonded pair. We couldn't split the dogs. And although they belonged legally to me, I knew that, the one dog really wanted to be with his dad, as I call him or called them. So we ended up doing a split custody situation because my ex traveled a lot. So they'd be with him most of the time. And then if he was traveling, I was the doggy daycare, which actually worked for everyone. It was great. But for us, what happened was when my ex was in a new relationship, had a baby, moved forward in his life. We both were moving forward, but it did become, as you just said, stressful for the pets and the additional humans now that we had in the mix, to the point where we decided it really wasn't in anyone's, including the dog's, best interest to do this shuffle back and forth. So we on our own, I think, came to this conclusion that this shared custody situation wasn't for the best, and we altered it. And it ended up working out well for everyone. When the older pet passed, when the older dog passed, the younger dog, the one that had ultimately been chosen for me, came back to live with me permanently. So it all went full circle. But I know that you say shared custody is often not the best thing for the pet. And so maybe we can just run through what pet parents would look at if they're talking about it. Because I think for everyone, including that judge you were just talking about, 1 week here, 1 week there seems like a great solution. They're dogs. They can move between households. What's the problem? Hey everyone, it's Susan. So look, we know going through a divorce is tough and self-care can easily get overlooked. I wanted to share something that helped me, and that was creating a cozy space to relax. Something that can help you is Parachute Home, which is bedding and home goods that bring real comfort. Imagine ending your day wrapped in the softest sheets or a warm blanket. So if you're looking to add a bit of peace to your home, visit divorcebeyond.com/parachute. When you shop through my link, it supports the podcast, and you know how much I appreciate that. So remember, taking care of yourself is a big step forward. So check out Parachute Home and get yourself your own warm, cozy hug. Stay tuned for more from Karis Nafte, pet custody mediator and certified dog behavior consultant, as she continues to share everything you need to know about how your divorce can impact your furry friends. Listen all the way to the end for a special offer from Karis on her pet custody course, which is designed to help you protect your animal companions in your divorce process.
Your dog will be fine. Dogs are so much more adaptable than we think they are. So they do miss people for sure, but after a few weeks of, living with one person, the dogs are okay. They're like, okay, cool, we're in our life. So don't imagine that your dog will be as upset as you are. I know that's hard to hear. It's harder for us than it is for dogs.
If you're finding this episode helpful, be sure to check out last week's show with special guest Kathy Clark. Kathy's a top realtor and real estate expert, and she shares all her insights into the buying and selling of your home and properties when you're getting divorced. Trust me, this is the inside information you need to know.
Everything has a value and everything has a cost, so somehow it's going to be collected. So I just encourage people to go into it open-minded and make sure their agent knows what they need. How do you need this structured, and is everybody on board with that? And that's the hardest part in a divorce situation, is getting everybody on the same page and everybody willing to agree.
And now we return to today's show.
I love your story, Susan, because that cycle of what you described is more common than people think, where if exes are, reasonable and there's not a big fight, they will often share the dogs to some capacity. And the tipping point when it stops, when it starts to feel sour or something changes, is when there's a new relationship. And then suddenly the dynamics just change, because the fact is, the dogs keep the relationship alive in some capacity. You are still relating to that person. If there's no human children in the picture, if it's just the dog children, and that is often the tipping point when it just doesn't work anymore, and then things have to be renegotiated. From what you're describing of your situation, I think that's really a lovely situation where the dogs had a primary owner. They were living with your ex, but they came to you when he traveled or when he went away on work things. And that for many dogs is actually a more sustainable, they kind of get that. And then it's like going to your house is like going on, it's like going on vacation. It's like, oh, cool, we're going to Susan's house. The challenge from my experience working with dog behavior is when it's a very short, constant trade-off, like 1 week. That's where the dogs, over time, start to show signs of stress. And the signs of stress, and I list these all in my book, people can look through it there, but very quickly, you will see a change in the dog's behavior, like maybe their appetite is changing, maybe they're not as bouncy as they used to be, or maybe they're a lot more energetic. Maybe they're sort of chewing up stuff, or maybe they're like peeing in the house. Maybe they're getting grumpy at the dog park when they used to be really friendly. So there are changes, there are observable changes that dogs will exhibit when they are stressed about a situation. So for people thinking about sharing their dog, the first thing to understand is that it's rarely ideal for the dogs. It's sometimes the only thing that people can accept. It might be the only compromise that the two humans can accept, but listeners shouldn't imagine it'll be great for the dog. I understand the thought. It's like, okay, cool, then the dog can stay in touch with both of us. But in the long run, moving between homes can become very stressful. But if it is something that you want to try, I suggest longer visits rather than shorter visits. So like 1 month, or at least 2 weeks, even longer if you can. You want to minimize the transitions that the dog or that the dogs will have to go through. It's different if it's not on a set rhythmic schedule like every week, where it's like you did, like, okay, when I have to work, you keep the dog. That dogs tend to flow with a little bit easier. The other suggestion I would make to listeners that I really, really suggest, if one thing people can take away from this, is if you do want to try to share your dog, do it for a set trial period. Say, okay, we're going to try this for 3 months or 6 months, let's say, as an example. And then we have a set date. We're going to sit down and we're going to see, is it working for us, the people? Do we want to carry on with this? And how do we think it is with the dogs? Now, this is, of course, a conversation that is only feasible for two people who are in conversation and the relationship is amicable. And I know that's not the case for everybody. So for the people where it is, you are in conversation, set it on your calendar. In other words, you don't want to wait until you, the people, are really not enjoying it and the dog is clearly not. It's like, be really adult about it and make a date to have a conversation and get an outside get some professional support if you need it. And then sometimes with a bit of time, maybe one person realizes, I'm going to maybe the dogs are happier with you and it feels easier to let the dogs go to that other person. Sometimes the new relationship changes things. A lot can change in 3 or 6 months. There's so much change that happens after a divorce that sometimes people don't realize. When you're in the middle of it, sort of feels like it's going to be horrible forever, but there's a real sort of launch pad into the next phase of your life. So that's what I would suggest to people, is a set trial period where there can be a open-hearted, kind conversation about what is working, what's not. And then if it's not working and the dog lives with one person, your dog will be fine. dogs are so much more adaptable than we think they are. So they do miss people for sure. But after a few weeks of, living with one person, the dogs are okay. They're like, okay, cool. We're in our life. So don't imagine that your dog will be as upset as you are. I know that's hard to hear. It's harder for us than it is for dogs.
What do you mean? No, I had to deal with that. I was like, from day one, when the puppy went running at my ex-husband at the time, right? But I will say, yes, that ended up being and ultimately, what was causing the humans stress, because with the new, and you're very right, I talk about it all the time, right? You're beyond divorce. That's why it's divorce and beyond, everyone, remember, right? The beyond is a very different place than the divorce. And what seems reasonable and what seems so important today as you're working through your divorce, a year from now and you're beyond, you may wonder what was I thinking? Or things just may evolve, which is what ended up happening for us. And by the way, just to end my story, I ended up going and getting a new puppy. My best friend who was living with me at the time got a puppy at the same exact time. Those turned out to be, if anyone out there is our soul dogs, right? I will always love every dog I've ever had, but there's always that one special dog. And for her, the same thing. That was my soul dog, right? It was that he came to me at the right time in my life. So you're talking about this shared custody and the moving back and forth. And we're talking about the pet parents. But we often have situations, as a divorce attorney, I just know this one. Very often the dogs are the children's dogs. And so now you have a situation where it adds another complication in, because if the pet resides only in one parent's house, suddenly now the other parent feels that their household is disfavored or disadvantaged because the dog is only at mom or dad's house. And, so you have that situation. I know a lot of parents think it's the best thing to do is that the dog goes with the kids back and forth. And I'm just wondering about your thoughts on that solution.
So when there's kids, the conversation changes, because first of all, the two people are going to stay in touch. It's not like the dog is the only thing. So the two exes will be connected. So that changes that whole aspect of it. When it comes to kids, you have to first look at the dog itself. You have to look at the age of the dog, kind of the breed of the dog. So is it a very easygoing, calm, mellow sort of dog who really is attached to the children? Or is it a dog that might have been bought for the children, but actually just wants to live with mom because mom takes the dog for a 10-mile run every day and it's a really active dog, or, because he does something with dad. So even though the intention can be to buy dogs for children, it just doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes if families are honest, the dog really is just bonded with one of the parents, might of course love the children. But as you described with your dogs do, if people are honest, really honest, almost every dog has a person they primarily bond with. If that person happens to be the child, right, then the shared custody with a dog moving with the child can seem to bring some anchoring to the dog that the child is the steady factor, the constant, but not always. So the same rule applies, or the same suggestion. Even if there's a child, try it for a trial period. And know that the upheaval that kids go through in a divorce, you can't also sort of take the dog away from them half the time, if they're used to that. So that's not fair on the child either. But what you can see sometimes, more times than I care to think about, the clients who I work with, if the dog is very stressed by, let's say, a very emotional child or a very maybe volatile home situation, if the dog is not coping with it, dogs can end up nipping the child. They can end up getting I know one story of this family. They had 3 small children and they had a tiny breed dog. And the youngest daughter really loved the small dog and would always, sort of her emotional blankie. And what started happening is on the transitions day that they were moving between parents, the dog started to hide. So it started to hide in the closet, very much trying to avoid what it knew was happening. Dogs know. They know when we're going to the park.
I was just going to say. They can't talk, but they can communicate.
Absolutely communicate. And the dog in his own way was hiding. And then the people used to put on a leash and drag it like in a cartoon, the dog's on the leash. And eventually what happened, it was quite sad, was that this dog ended up biting the little girl while she was dragging it into the car. And it worked out okay in the end because the dog ended up living with the grandmother, which worked for everybody. So the dog stayed within the family system. But what was happening with this particular dog was that it was did not have the character to handle a stressed out child. And so I actually helped them find another dog that was a much bigger in size dog that was much calmer, just like a sweet teddy bear of a dog who did move with the kids and coped with it. So we have to look at each dog honestly with clear eyes, because when dogs do start hiding, that's the precursor sometimes to their behavior getting worse. And then if you don't notice them hiding, sometimes they have no choice but, for the behavior to escalate. So look at it in that way. Don't insist that the dog is going to move with a child forever. Be flexible in your thinking, be observant, and be curious, and then make those decisions organically, but don't get stuck on it, because sometimes things like that can happen.
I think that's a wonderful story, and it raises another point that I wanted to talk about, because I know that you talk about it in the book, is the breed of the dog, right? I mentioned I had Yorkies. They are the yappiest, hyper, little things ever. I also have a Havanese now, who is like the most Klingon-y dog you've ever had in your life. And I have a Labrador retriever, who's basically like a rug. I mean, she's just like, biggest lover. I could totally see if I was talking about someone putting a leash, though, and dragging one of those dogs, the lab would totally put up with it and would never in a million years. But that Havanese might do something. So how much does the dog breed play into, should this be a part of the conversation? Because we do know, right? Different breeds have different personalities.
Hugely different personalities. And to me, the question of the dog breed is the biggest missing piece in most of the conversations. So the dogs are the most varied animal on the planet. They're the most varied species that has ever existed. They are, if you think of, Havanese and a Labrador and a Chihuahua and a German Shepherd, their characters are totally different. And their response to stress and their response to intense energy is very different. So when you're looking at whether it's moving with children or sharing custody or all of the factors, look at what was the dog you have to do. And if you have a dog, like I have this picture of my Australian cattle dog behind me, who's the same as a Bluey, for anyone who watches the cartoon Bluey. And Sam is a cattle dog who's bred to live on a farm and move cattle around. Now, I don't have a farm or cattle, but I do a lot of other training with him. But Sam is an example of a dog that was originally bred to work on a farm and guard the farm and move the livestock around. The same you'll see from German Shepherds and Border Collies and most dogs that are now guard dogs, usually started as farm dogs. Those dogs, more so than most, are genetically programmed to bond both with the property and one person. So for a herding dog or a guard dog breed, unless miraculously the dog is bonded with a child, which usually those dogs, the more intense dogs usually bond with adults because they need the intensity of an adult person. Those dogs should stay with the person they're bonded with. It's very stressful for those kind of breeds to be shifting around. They feel quite lost. Other breeds, like you're describing, like your Labrador. So the gun dog breeds, and these are dogs that were originally bred to be hunting dogs, are very mellow. There's always exceptions, so I'm being general, of course, but they're very mellow souls because for them, they were bred to not be bothered by the sound of gunshots when people were hunting birds, to be able to go in cold water and have sticks brush them, and they don't care about anything. So their response to stress is not to be bothered by it, which is why they're good for guide dogs. So for them, they're, like you're describing, if something stressful is happening, they usually want to take a nap. It's like, maybe, should I bring you a tennis ball? Maybe that would make you feel better. How about a shoe? Other dogs, especially toy breed dogs, small dogs, will usually, the smaller the dog is, the more susceptible they are to stress, like physically small. Their bodies just don't have as much space to sort of hang on to difficult things. So small dogs can struggle also. So the dogs that are more likely to be okay with it are more in the hunting sort of origin, those kind of dogs. Terrier type dogs can also be pretty robust little characters and be okay with change. So you have to definitely look at, and also the energy level of the dog. So what some people don't necessarily factor into things when there's children is, okay, if the dog is moving with the child, if the child's at school all day, who's exercising the dog? A 10-minute walk when the child comes home from school is not enough for a very active dog. So is the parent who is getting the dog and the children going to have time to exercise that dog? Because dogs that don't get enough exercise, well, let me put it this way. Tired dogs are good dogs. The number one reason, I mean, people love labels. They say, oh, my dog has social anxiety, or, my dog is depressed, or the number one reason why dogs misbehave is they are bored. And if they don't have enough exercise, they'll chew, they bark all the time, they dig holes in your carpet or in your, and they chase the cat too much because they're a bit frustrated. So that's a tangent, but it really applies to what we're talking about. On that note, if you are moving the dog between homes or with the child, the best favor you can do for your dog is when you do the handoff, do it on a walk. So as opposed to driving to someone's house and sort of handing the dog off at a doorway, I also find that a very stressful moment for many people involved. Can be an uncomfortable moment chatting to your ex. The dog picks this up, makes the whole thing worse. My suggestion is you find a neutral park. That is where you meet. And my other suggestion is that you should choose a park that you only go to on transition day, so the dog knows what's happening. Don't do it at your regular dog park, because every time you're there, the dog's going to wonder, is this the transition time or not? Whereas if there's a special park that is only on transition day, the dog will know and will understand what's about to happen. And then when he goes to the normal dog park, he can just enjoy the park. Because if not, what happens is the dog's looking. It's like, oh, is that my other person? Or, they can become a little bit anxious from that. So that's also a tip people can take home with them.
Well, you've given so many, I call them golden nuggets. These are great little golden nuggets, and you actually have so many more in the book. I do want to make sure that we talk about the book, let people know where to get it. And then you actually have a wonderful pet custody course that you have offered a discount for my listeners. So let's dive into that.
So my book is available on my website. It's available on Amazon, and it is a guidebook. It's a very concise book. It's an easy read, but it is a guide for people who are going through divorce. And it's also a guide for divorce professionals who want to help their clients in the best way possible. So I address many of these things I talked about and a whole lot more. And it's a really wonderful book to read to get your head in the headspace of thinking about this from your dog's point of view before you go into a mediation or before you start negotiating with your ex. So please read it. It's so helpful. And it can really help you sort of come. My goal from the book is that people who read it can make their own decision. They're not going to leave it to the lawyers. They're not going to leave it to a judge. They can, from the right place, make the decision themselves. And then my pet custody course, which I'm so, so proud of. This is the first one in the world. It's the first course on this topic that has been developed. It's for divorce professionals specifically who want real deep understanding of how do I help my clients? I kind of call it like the voice of the pet. The voice of the child was a term that came out about how do we really take care of children in divorce? And I am working on the voice of the pet because obviously dogs can't talk, but they do speak with their body language. So you can use these things to really help your clients make good decisions. So anyone listening, you get 10% off of the next pet custody course. People can send me an email, I'll send them all of the information. It's a 6-hour course. And it's fun. You learn a lot about dogs. I mean, anyone who comes, it's like, wow, I didn't know that about dogs. So I try to make it as entertaining as possible because I always learn more if I'm entertained. I don't learn anything if I'm bored. And the course is not boring, let me tell you. So yes, those are the things that are available. And also for anybody listening, going through a breakup or a divorce, I offer a free half-an-hour meeting with any new prospective client. So if anyone would like to see if mediation's right for them or just wants a bit of advice, people can go to my website and they can book that time with me. And I'm really happy to help in any way I can.
I appreciate that. I wish, I will say it was one of the more long drawn out discussions in my divorce back in the day. And again, I was a divorce attorney going through a divorce at the time. We managed to solve the monetary issues and all those things, but talking about our dogs, it just really was a very drawn out, very difficult conversation. And I do wish we had more of that context of what was right for the dogs. I think in the end, we ended up doing that. I like to think that it all did work out, but the conversation itself at the time was very what I call I-centered. I can't imagine not seeing them. I this, I that, and for both of us. And again, ultimately, I think it worked out well. But who keeps the dog? Through the eyes of the dog or through the voice of the dog, through what's best for the dog, it really is something that people should be more educated on, given more tools to work with. And you've done a really fabulous job of that and really helping people. So I will, of course, listeners, as always, have links to everything that Karis has mentioned in the show notes. You can also go to whokeepsthedog.com. Everything is there, but please go to the show notes. You'll have direct links to everything. And Karis, this is a conversation I could have over and over again. And I have like 50 questions I want to ask you about things my dogs do so that you can tell me, since you're the dog whisperer, the dog, the person who understands what they're thinking and all, but I'll save those for another episode. Listeners, go ahead and reach out with your questions for Karis and we'll be able to have another episode with her. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Susan. It's been real fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me today on the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I hope you found some information and inspiration to help you on this journey. Please join me every Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a new episode. And if you like the show, please take the time to subscribe and leave me a 5-star review on iTunes. You can also find more information on the website at divorceandbeyondpod.com, where you'll find links to the YouTube channel, transcripts of the episodes, and other bonus content. So I'll see you next week to help you move through your divorce and beyond.